What's going on, you guys? My name is Cisco, and welcome back to the final installment of Building Your Build. I must apologize that this video has taken so long. If you are subscribed to us, you have seen the many videos that we've had to film since the last episode, but we are back finally to install a MOSFET into the Gearbox. Now, originally we were planning on doing a Perun MOSFET, but since then, the Zion Arms Nebula Mosfet came out, and you know, for all the features that it has and for the price point, it's the best bang for your buck, and I do think it is one of the better MOSFETs that you can install into your gun at an affordable price. Now, it is a little bit tricky, so that's a bonus for you guys because we want to show how you to install it, so you know you can learn how to do that. But relatively, it's pretty much the same as installing another aftermarket MOSFET. And I know a few of you guys have been asking how to install the Zion Arms Nebula Mosfet, so we're going to do that today. Alright guys, as you can see here, the gearbox is split open. If you need a refresher or want to learn how to disassemble the gearbox, make sure you watch the previous Building Your Build videos so you can see how to get this far. But this is where you're going to start when installing the MOSFET. Pretty much you're going to take everything out, honestly. So let's just get to doing that. At this point, all you're really going to need is a Phillips head screwdriver. But depending on your gearbox, you might need an Allen key for the gearbox screws themselves that hold them together. But I think a Phillips head will do you right. So let's just get to disassembling. So first we're going to take out the compression set. That's just the tappet plate spring, and then all of that can just get set to the side, and then you're left with the powertrain of the gearbox. So first we're going to take out the trigger right here. Honestly, it probably would have been better to take out the gears, but I'm taking that out first, setting that aside. Make sure you don't lose your spring. You will need this later. And then I'm going to put my hand on the anti-reversal latch, take out the bevel gear, make sure all the shims are intact there in place. Set the anti-reversal latch to the side, and then the sector gear, and finally the spur gear. Again, making sure that you take all of the shims along with each gear and what side they go onto so you don't miss out. Okay, now this is where you are going to be replacing your MOSFET. The trigger assembly here, the traditional trigger assembly, does have one screw that attaches, and then it does have this spring for the trolley. So we're just going to remove that spring. Honestly, you could just remove that with your finger right there. And then take that Phillips head screwdriver and unscrew the screw right there. And then you can just slide this bad boy out. All right, now, again, you do not want to lose any of the springs or the screws just in case. So I'm going to take the screw, set it aside. And the wiring, the original wiring assembly, I can just yeet. I'm not actually going to yeet it. I'm going to throw it to the side. Okay, now we do have the cutoff lever here, which is a Phillips head again. So I'm going to unscrew this. And you're going to want to be careful with the cutoff lever because there is a spring on the other side. So what I find best on how to remove it is lifting from the front post or the front of the cutoff lever and then just sliding it out forward like that. That way you can flip over the gearbox very carefully, and then you can see the spring is exposed. A flathead would come in handy here, so you can just take that spring out very carefully. Maybe some very small needle nose pliers. There goes that spring right there. Gonna set that aside because that is very important as well. Now that we have the gearbox completely disassembled, it's time to open up the Zion Arms Nebula Mosfet. So the reason this MOSFET is tricky is because it actually includes a sector gear. Okay, out of the box, once you open it, you'll see the programming card set to the side. You'll need that to learn how to program the card. And they gave you a swaggy Zion Arms Nebula, or actually just a Zion Arms patch. So we'll set all of that aside. And then you'll see there is step 1 and step 2 for the boxes. So we're just going to take them out, take a look at what is in each box. So, I mean, it's pretty straightforward though. We do have the trigger board and the sector gear. And just to show you guys on camera what they look like, sliding it out right there. Oh, that beautiful MOSFET. Look at that. Does have the Zion Arms logo, the American flag, and of course wired to Deans, which is very nice. Of course, it's going to be rolled up like this, so you are going to unravel it and work on installing it and, you know, managing the wires. But I'm going to set this aside for now because I want to concentrate on the sector gear. Now, the reason it includes its own sector gear is because this is actually a magnet sensor MOSFET. So when you slide this out, you're going to get the gear right here, and then you are going to get it right here with the sector clip. Now, I have removed the sector clip here, so this will improve the FPS and feeding in full auto. Mainly the FPS, because the sector clip, it does pull or affect the tappet plate and air nozzle very interestingly, I will say. So I pulled that off, so it will improve the feeding in full auto, or the FPS in full auto. And you're going to need to shim this gear to your existing gear set. Now, from our testing, the Zion Arms sector gear will work with an 18:1 gear set ratio and a 16:1 gear set ratio. But from our testing, we have not seen it be compatible with anything of a lower ratio gear set. So 14:1, 13:1s, 12:1s, we have not seen it work because this does mesh with the spur gear here. Now, for the sake of time, I have actually already shimmed this gear. If you need a refresher or want to learn how to shim your gear set, we do have an episode of Building Your Build directly for shimming. So reference that and follow the same steps and you'll be able to shim this properly. Now that that is clear, I am now going to move on to installing the trigger board. Now, again, this is Zion Arms Nebula Mosfet. For this, you will actually need to take the screw from your existing trigger assembly, the one that I just took out of, let me pull it out, from right here. That is the mounting screw right there. I'm just going to take that existing screw, and then that one gets placed into here. So the steps that I took to disassemble the entire gearbox are going to be the same for installing any other aftermarket MOSFET. So if you want to install a Perun or a Gate Titan or a Jeftron, Leviathan, it's going to be the same up until here. Now, depending on your MOSFET will depend on the steps that you need to take to install it. So reference the installation manual. I know we are a bunch of boneheads and we like to figure it out ourselves. Don't do that this time because that's going to be an expensive no-no if you break it. Now, we have here, I'm just going to pull the wiring off to the side. And as you can see, I'll demonstrate it again, the outline is very similar to the existing or standard trigger assembly, the base footprint here. So I'm just going to reference that to line it up, and then it just slides right in like that. So then from here, all you got to do is take that mounting screw, install it into the small hole right here. It's going to be very difficult, but right next to the Zion Arms logo, I'm going to hold that down, and then I'm going to tighten that screw into place. And excuse my Parkinson's, jeez. So when tightening this down, you do not want to torque it down. You just want to do it finger tight, just enough to hold the gearbox down, because you can put too much torque and the board can flex, and that will cause issues with the gun completely. Don't do that. So finger tight, you're good to go there. And then to help manage the wiring, I'm going to start to untangle it, and then so we see that unlike the standard wiring, there's actually 3 wires instead of 2 that lead out of the trigger assembly. So we're going to start to route it, keeping it as flat as possible, going down. So what I like to do is any of the wires that are going to cross the motor or the bottom of the gearbox here, I like to lay down first, because you don't want it to poke out and have the chance for the gear to act, or the motor gear, the pinion gear, to strip the wire wrap, if you will. So luckily the Apex gearbox does have a nice shelf to keep the wires tucked in, so I am going to utilize that for sure. Again, just routing the wires around You're going to want to gently bend it. Don't try to do a harsh bend or anything. Pushing it down as we go, like such. And then the last wiring is going to be directly for the motor. So I'm going to slide that on top of the other existing wires that I've already laid down, and then wrap it around the screw post here. So then from here, you're pretty much good to go on this side. And then it's a matter of routing the wires to the end of the gearbox. This is a rear wired gearbox assembly. Zion Arms does not make a front wired assembly yet. If you do have a front wired gearbox assembly, the wires are going to stick out through here, and then you're just going to get the two motor connector wires come out, and you'll route it like such. So here we go, kind of just twisting the wires out of the way, placing them down, and we are good to go. So obviously the wires are going to want to jump out of the housing. It's natural because of the stiffness of the wires. You might get some wire sets like the wiring in the Perun MOSFET, where it's actually it's not as stiff, so you're able to press them down and they won't move like that. So now that I have it pretty much wired the way I want to, the most important part is to make sure that the wiring is in place when you're closing the gearbox. Now that is completed, as you can see, the MOSFET here will actually take up space where the cutoff lever would go. So you are actually going to be removing the cutoff lever completely, because the Zion Arms Nebula MOSFET does have active braking. So it will prevent overcycling from the gearbox. So instead of having a physical switch, you are going to have an electrical one that will do the job pretty damn nicely. Okay, so after that, it's just a matter of reassembling the gearbox. So in the way that I assembled the gearbox in the previous video, going to start off with the spur gear, laying it down, making sure all the shims are correct. Then I am going to do the sector gear, again, making sure the shims are laid in place. Then I'm going to go to the compression set, lay that down nice and clean. And then I do have to attach the spring here. This is where a small flathead will come in handy. So move that. Bear with me. I'll move it forward instead, make my life easy. There we go. So lay that down flat and nice. Then you're going to attach the tappet plate spring back to the post. Do not forget that, because that again affects the feeding. And I am being such a klutz today. There we go. I held that screwdriver very weirdly. That's pretty much set up. So actually what I'm going to do before installing the bevel and anti-reversal latch, I am going to reinstall the trigger to make sure that that is just properly aligned. Honestly, you should have done this beforehand, but no harm in doing it right now. So one thing that you want to note actually is making sure that the wiring is pushed to the side. So you do not want the trigger to actually pinch on the wiring. Same thing with the trigger spring. You don't want that to be making contact with it. It should just sit in the path that it's laid down, so you don't pinch the wiring there and cause any issues. So just like installing any other spring, being a pain in the ass, hold it down, sliding that forward, and then laying that into the post right there. And then from there, looks like it is activating the micro switch button right there perfectly fine. Now this is actually where you can have the opportunity to install a adjustable speed trigger, something so you can shorten the pistol or the trigger pull a little bit more to your liking. I do like the Apex flat trigger, so I am going to be saving that here for the time being. So gonna rely on the friction there. If you do have the AirTech Studios anti-reversal latch and the trigger clips to hold them in place, good on you. Unfortunately, I lost mine, so I'm bearing with it manually. After that has been installed, I'm going to set the anti-reversal latch with the spring, of course, holding that down sliding the bevel gear, making sure the shims are in place again. That is good to go right there. Hold that down. So again, you are going to need to do a little bit of finessing to hold everything together. And you're pretty much ready to reassemble the gearbox. So again, let me route the wiring down. So what I'm actually going to do is use my finger to hold the wiring and the anti-reversal latch down. Your gearbox might not have this window cut, so you might need to use a screwdriver to hold the anti-reversal latch down this way. That can easily be done. Keep that in mind. Again, each gearbox is different. So now that we have this pretty much assembled, I'm going to just make sure everything is lined up properly. See that? Wanted to make sure that piston's lined up, the tappet plate is in place, and the spring for the trigger. Oh, see, this is the tricky part right here. Okay, so reassembling the gearbox, always a pain. Make sure the spring for the trigger is actually set on the inside. There we go. Press that down just to help it keep it in place. But now that everything's looking good, quick tip, what you could do is use the tappet plate to hold down the shims. That will take it out of alignment, but you will be able to adjust that as you are closing the gearbox by pressing on the air nozzle. Okay, now that we are back to where I was, I'm going to finesse the top of the gearbox shell back on to the lower end. This is where a lot of finessing is going to take place. So you will need to press the safety bar and make sure all of the the gears, the cutoff lever, the wiring, or not the cutoff lever, the anti-reversal latch, I'm sorry. All the posts are lined up with the shims and gear sets accordingly. And there you go, finally. Okay, now that the gearbox is closed, all there is left to do is reassemble it, or close it up, I mean. So what I'm going to do is seal the gearbox up like so. That was a shorter screw. And then I'm going to put the spring and spring guide back in, install the pistol grip and motor to see how it sounds. Now, if you have been following this series, you know that I use an Aries Amoeba pistol grip originally. I have changed to the classic Army toolless motor grip because I wanted to do an all black build. I had a change of heart last minute, so I installed this instead. And if you want to know how to change out your pistol grip, again, watch our previous videos of the Building Your Build series. Now, when installing the screws to close the gearbox, make sure that all of the wiring is clear of the edges. You aren't pinching at all, because that can tear through the wrap or the cover of the wiring and expose the metal to the wiring and cause a short, which you don't want to do, because that will definitely fry your MOSFET or blow up your battery, which is a big no-no. That will get other people involved. Remember what I said about the selector switch or the cutoff lever spring that goes to the selector plate. You actually will not need it anymore because, again, you removed the cutoff lever here. It won't press on the gear set to actually do semi or release in full auto. You'll get all the spring tension from the cutoff here, so that will give you what you need. And because we removed the spring from the original trigger assembly, the tension that you'll get in the trigger comes from the trigger spring itself. Now, one last tip before installing your pistol grip is you're going to want to bend the motor tabs into the correct position. I'm going to actually bend these first before reassembling the gearbox. So you can use needle nose pliers, but I highly recommend at least taping the ends of the needle nose pliers because you can rip the shrink wrap. I'm just going to bend it with my fingers It is not very tough metal. It is made of, I believe this is brass or aluminum. So you just lightly bend it, so you're good to go. And now I'm going to install spring guide, spring. This one does have a quick change spring system. For those of you that have a gearbox that don't have a quick change spring system, this is going to be much more difficult because you're going to have to worry about keeping the spring guide and compression assembly aligned alongside the trigger and the wiring. So I do feel your pain. But now that we're here, I'm going to reinstall the pistol grip and test to see how it sounds and the performance. This, you will need a longer Phillips screwdriver. If you started off with a long one to begin with, you're good to go. And here we go. So again, you're going to want to just size up which wiring goes where. There's obviously the two larger holes, the main hole for the motor and then the holes for the grip screws. So we're just going to align them accordingly. Slide that in. There we go. And then I'm going to install the... Now I'm going to install the grip screws. And I don't think I'm going to be able to show this on camera. I think we have shown this in a previous build. So please reference the entire Building Your Build series. Finger tight for those. You do not want to strip the screws from, or the threading from the gearbox shell. That will give you a very bad day indeed. And because this is the Classic Army toolless motor grip, the toolless part is actually in the pistol grip here. There's actually just a spring-loaded hinge here that that will swing open for you to use. Now, when installing the motor to the new MOSFET, what you want to do is gauge the wiring, see which wire is longer, and that is going to be the wire that you're going to cross at the bottom of the pistol grip. So what I like to do, obviously just send it out. So the black wire is going to be longer, so I'm going to be bending it on the inside of the pistol grip, so it is routed to the rear. So both wires will be to the end like that. Now the main part is you're pressing it toward the side of the pistol grip so it is not interfering with the motor, so you don't accidentally pinch the motor and give it a short, you know, cause a whole bunch of issues. So once that's pushed to the side, wow, strong motor. What I'm going to do, I know the black wire is going to come across, so I'm going to align it so the ground is on the according side. Now, depending on the MOSFET will depend on how you need to route the wiring, because sometimes the red wire is toward the front of the pistol grip instead of the back. So keep that in mind. So from here, I'm going to slide that in. And I'm doing this very gently. I'm only pressing on it lightly. That way, in case I feel there is resistance where there shouldn't be, I can prevent damage from happening. So from here, and from here, it looks like I got it perfectly seated. So the motor is able to go in and out. So then from here, it's a matter of installing the wire. So I'm going to route the red wire first. Typically, this is how you want to do it. So you'll have the rear wire getting set first, and then the black wire coming over. This is tricky, but it may depend on how much wiring is actually available. So this is a trial and error process. It does not look like there is enough wiring to come across, as you can see here. So normally the wiring will come over the top and then over here to the post, but as you can see, there is not enough wiring. So what I'm actually going to do is try to install it with the black wire toward the front of the gearbox and the red wire toward the rear, like this. So there's going to be one wire on each side, and I will see if this is actually how it's supposed to be installed. Because Zion Arms, I love you guys, but you did not include a manual on how to install the Zion Arms Mosfet, which is why I'm doing it for you guys. So Zion Arms, if you're listening, include that. Thank you. All right, so here we go. Wired to the front, so I'm going to just press the positive wire in. Sorry, I want to get that in frame. So press that in, and then we're going to take the black wire, run that in as well. Right there. So now that that's in, you want to make sure that the wiring is out of the way of the grip here, or the motor plate. So I'm just going to press that off to the side, make sure that that is aligned, and then I'm slowly going to place it in just like that. And now that it is in place, it's time to give it a test fire. And I just realized that I don't have a battery. All right, guys, I grabbed a battery. I do have a Lancer Tactical 11.1 LiPo 30C discharge. I'm going to be testing the gearbox now with the Zion Arms Nebula Mosfet in there. That's a good sign. It did activate. So let's give it a test fire. So pressing on the selector plate all the way forward is going to be safe. That is a manual safe. Releasing it slightly is going to be semi. Sounding all right. Sounding all right. In full auto all the way back. Whoo! So that is a little windy. That might be because of the pistol grip and the way the motor is set. So let me see here. Just adjust the motor height. There we go. Nice and crisp. And as you guys can see, in semi-auto, it does not need the cutoff lever. You can see from the top or the rear here that, oop, I let it go. So that is actually an error code that'll happen if you are firing while changing the selector. So that is actually my bad. So I'm gonna hold that in place. And it does sound like it is running properly. So now the best thing to do is to insert it into the gun and see if it's actually feeding BBs. All right, so now it's time to reinstall the gearbox into the lower receiver. So just doing the process that I did in reverse, unplugging the wiring, sliding the motor out. There we go. All right, and then right there, that slides out. Make sure when you are taking the pistol grip off, you are making sure you're not scratching the wiring, trying to be as gently as possible to get that done. And then make sure that you have both screws and it didn't fall back into the gearbox. So from here, it's literally just a matter of assembling it into the gearbox. Switching that to semi, routing the wires from the rear of the gearbox, and then I'm going to slide the motor wires into where the pistol grip would go, and then just gently slide that bad boy in, and you're perfect. Now from here, just a matter of assembling all the body pins. So first I'm going to do the receiver pin. Make sure that is properly aligned. There we go. So once it goes in, you are actually going to want to use a rubber side mallet just to lightly press that in, just like that. From there, going to install the rear body pin. And these are going to be the two main pins to secure the gearbox. And make sure you put it in the right side. So for the rear body pin, there's normally the cutout for where you want to install the pin. And if you need to, make sure you use that rubber mallet just to tap that into place firmly. From here, I can reinstall the pistol grip again. Now, you might be thinking, Cisco, why don't I just install the gearbox onto the receiver and then install the motor grip so I don't have to do that twice? And the reason I typically do this is because I'm able to test the gearbox without having to completely disassemble the gun again. So it does add one extra step in testing, but it takes off a couple of steps overall. So what I just did before, route the wiring properly like this to the holes, making sure that your gearbox and pistol grip are aligned properly, because you can do it like that and then realize it and then say, oh crap, and look stupid, like I have done plenty of times before. Again, only finger tight. You do not want to torque that down because you can risk stripping the threads in the gearbox. I want to reiterate that again because it is one of the most painful things that you can do to a gearbox, because if it doesn't have multiple screws or screw mounts, you're going to need to replace the gearbox or find a way to rethread it. It hurts my soul. Now from here, I'm going to reinstall the motor, sliding that in, remembering the way that the wiring was placed before. So positive wire toward the rear, ground wire toward the front, sliding the motor tabs in, make sure those are good, and make sure the wiring is set out of the way of the base plate so that could just slide right in, just like that. Now we can install the buffer tube assembly. From here, take your end plate here, slide that onto the back of the receiver, of course sliding your wiring through it. Be careful, again, this is an area where you can pinch. As you can see, I am routing the wires out of the way. So then now I can install the buffer tube. So we're just going to slide that all the way through. Right here, going to, so I can see it on camera, slide the screw into place there. What I like to do is I like to lift up the buffer tube after placing it down, or after setting the mounting hardware in there, so I can make sure that the screw is going all the way down and it's not interrupted. And then tightening this down. So I'm actually going to unscrew the castle nut to make this finger tight right here. Perfection. And then just going to tighten that down. This is where an AR wrench would come in handy to torque it down. And my AR wrench is downstairs. So what I'm actually going to do is, instead, if you don't have an AR wrench, this is the hack. Unscrew the buffer tube a little bit, not a lot, just a little bit, and then you're going to torque that castle nut down, and then you're going to tighten the buffer tube screw. On a real firearm, a real AR, that will not work. You need to torque it down. But on Airsoft, it actually acts as somewhat of a spacer, so it gives counter tension. The mounting screw will pull the buffer tube toward the receiver, and the castle nut will push it away. So now it's solid on there. It will not move. And from here, I'm just going to install the other little tidbits, the mag release, the mock bolt catch. Unscrew all that goodness. Slide that into place. Install spring. Torque this beauty down. Just like that. And then the mock bolt goes right here. And then from here I can reinstall the upper receiver, which we did up very nicely previously. So depending on your gun, if you have maybe a G&G, the body pin will actually stay in the receiver. In this Apex, it will actually come completely out. I know that Lancer Tacticals will do that same. Pin style where it will come completely out. So the main thing is that you are inserting it from the correct side. As you can see from right here, there is a little bit of a shelf. So when you install the pin, it will lay somewhat flush to that. And then the Allen screw right here. And then of course, using the correct Allen screw to tighten that down. There we are. Now, here we go. The gun is now completely assembled. And I'm going to quickly test it with some BBs to make sure that it is firing correctly. All right, guys, I'm gonna do the chrono test. Pretty damn consistent. Let's check that rate of fire. All right, shooting about 24 BBs a second. Not that bad, pretty healthy. Now I'm just gonna do a functionality test, make sure that it is feeding properly and, you know, see the performance. So, trigger response, of course. Pretty damn snappy, all because of that Zion Arms Mosfet. Let me check that rate of fire again. This gun rips. So crazy. It's just, the trigger response is insane, especially with that Zion Arms Nebula Mosfet. You could use the 11-1 LiPo reliably without any problems. And, you know, just have it running all day. And am I speed QB enough because I don't have any iron sights? All right, guys, coming back from the range test. As you can see, it is a beast. Comparing the performance now to what it was stock, night and day difference. Now, after all the blood, sweat, and tears, was it worth it? You guys tell me. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in for the final episode of Building Your Build. Again, I apologize for the long delay, but it's here, so you can stop complaining. And with this series, hopefully you are able to build your airsoft gun the way that you want to. But if you don't feel confident in your abilities or skills, you can check in your airsoft gun at airsoftgi.com and let our world-class tech department take care of you, because they are pretty damn good, I gotta say myself. All the parts that were included in this gun are available at airsoftgi.com. So if you want to support us, you can actually pick them up there and use the Wombo Combo for the best savings at Airsoft. But if you are interested in this gun itself, if you are digging it, it's going to be sold as a custom. So I'm going to pass it over to our techs and have them give it a once over internally just to give it the stamp of approval. And of course, they're going to Gucciify it by throwing on some accessories, maybe a short dot, maybe a hand stop, who knows? You'll see it eventually on the website, so stay tuned for that. And do you guys want us to continue building your build on a different platform? A sniper? An AK? What was it? A sniper? A sniper? You don't want to build an AK? Neither do I! If you want me to continue building your build, let me know in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace!